I didn't know the worst part would be how ordinary it all seemed at first. This isn't one of those stories where the house was haunted from the start or the air felt thick with doom. No. When I moved into the apartment on Marlowe Street, everything felt like a clean slate. I'd just come out of a long, exhausting breakup, and the idea of having a small place to myself, just 2 rooms and a kitchenette, felt like the emotional reset I needed. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a quiet, older building that creaked a bit but had good bones. Hardwood floors, a skylight in the bedroom, and a fire escape that overlooked the alley behind a row of shops. The kind of place that seemed built to hold peace and privacy. I moved in on a Friday, and by Sunday evening, I had things mostly unpacked. I set up my bed, arranged a few framed photos on the shelf above my desk, and got used to the sound of the radiator clicking at night. It was a quiet place. I didn't see many neighbors except for the elderly woman downstairs who always smelled faintly of lavender and smoked long cigarettes on her balcony. By Tuesday, the quiet started to feel too quiet. That night, I woke up around 3:17 a.m. I know the time because I remember glancing at my phone. There was a faint sound coming from the other room, like something scraping gently across the wooden floor. I froze. I told myself it was probably just the heat kicking in again, or maybe the wind outside pushing something against the fire escape. Still, I sat up and listened. The sound stopped. Total silence. I waited for a few more minutes, heart beating a little too fast for how small the noise had been, and eventually laid back down. The next morning, everything looked normal. My keys were still on the kitchen counter. Nothing seemed moved, no windows open. I brushed it off. The next night, the same thing. 3 a.m. came and went. Then around 3:15, I heard the sound again, faint, deliberate, like something light was being dragged. I turned on the light and went into the living room. Nothing. I checked behind the couch, in the kitchen, even the hallway closet. All normal. But then I noticed my front door. The lock was slightly turned. Not fully unlocked, but not locked the way I always left it. I live alone. No one has a spare key. I locked it again, tried to ignore the sudden spike of anxiety in my stomach. I sat on the couch with a blanket, the TV glowing silently, until sunrise. The next few nights, I started leaving a light on in the kitchen and the hallway. I also downloaded one of those motion detection apps for my phone and pointed the camera toward the front door while I slept. I didn't expect to catch anything, but I needed peace of mind. I needed to stop feeling like something was just off. Then came Friday morning. I checked the motion camera as I ate breakfast, flipping through the previous night's timeline. Around 3:14 a.m., there was a faint blip, a small motion marker. I tapped it. The clip played. At first, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed the front door. It looked ajar, not wide open, just barely cracked. There was a sliver of darkness where there should have been solid wood. Then the frame flickered. The camera adjusted. And for one frame, just one, I saw a face. Not fully visible. Just the suggestion of it in the dark. Pale, expressionless, eyes staring directly toward the camera. Toward me. Then it was gone. The clip ended. I dropped my phone. I must have watched that video 15 times. I tried scrubbing through frame by frame, but it always glitched around that one part, making it hard to isolate the image clearly. Just a flash of something, someone, right outside my door. I didn't sleep that night. I started stacking furniture in front of the door after that, just in case. Not enough to make it obvious, but enough that if someone tried to come in, it would be loud. The next night, no sounds. No motion. Just quiet. Maybe I scared whoever was away. Maybe it was some sick prank and they gave up. Maybe. Then came the envelope. It was waiting for me when I came home from work the following Monday. No postage, no name. Just a plain manila envelope sitting on my doormat. I knew instantly something was wrong. I picked it up with trembling fingers, carried it inside like it might explode, and opened it slowly. Inside were 3 printed photographs. All of them were pictures of me, sleeping. Each photo was from a different night. In one, I was curled on my side, blanket up to my chin. In another, I was sprawled on my back, one arm flung off the bed. And in the last, the photo was taken so close that I could see the pores on my face, the stubble on my chin. Whoever took them had been inside the room, inside my bedroom. They had stood right next to my bed. I fell back into the wall, my vision swimming. I called the police. They came, took my statement, looked around. I showed them the photos, the video. They said there were no signs of forced entry. No fingerprints except my own. They were polite but skeptical. Maybe a prank. Maybe a jilted friend. Maybe I was sleepwalking and staging things myself. I could see in their eyes. They thought I was either lying or spiraling. One of them, Officer Hayes, stayed behind after the others left. He looked at me quietly for a long moment and then said, "You should stay somewhere else. Just for a few days. Trust your gut." I didn't. I should have, but I didn't. Because 2 nights later, I found another photo, this time under my pillow. And in it, I was asleep just like before. But there was something new in this one. A hand, pale, veiny, resting gently on my shoulder. My eyes were open. The photo stayed on my nightstand for 2 hours before I worked up the courage to touch it again. Not just because of what it showed, me lying in bed, eyes open with that pale, unfamiliar hand resting on my shoulder, but because it shouldn't have been there. I hadn't left my room. I hadn't unlocked the door. I had checked the windows before going to sleep. They were locked. Always locked. The idea that someone had been there in the room and that I hadn't known it, not until I found that photo, was tearing something loose in my mind. I barely slept that night, or the next. I moved my dresser in front of the door and started sleeping with a kitchen knife under my pillow. A stupid thing to do, probably dangerous, but I needed something, some false sense of control. It didn't help. 3 nights later, my phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. A text. No name. No number. Just, "You're not alone." My heart thumped against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack one. I didn't reply. I turned on every light in the apartment and sat in the hallway with my back against the wall and the knife in my hand. I waited until sunrise. When the daylight finally crept in and I felt safe enough to move, I called the police again. Officer Hayes showed up alone this time. He looked tired. I showed him a photo from under my pillow and the text message. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he asked if I'd ever heard of targeted stalking behaviors. I said no. He explained that sometimes stalkers didn't want to harm people directly, not at first. They wanted to insert themselves into your life, make you aware of them, create unease, psychological proximity. This is all escalation, he said. It started small, scraping noises, photos, now contact. If it keeps going, he trailed off like he didn't want to finish the sentence. But I could feel what he didn't say hanging in the air. If it keeps going, it becomes dangerous. I asked if there was anything they could do. He sighed. We filed a report. But unless there's a break-in or you're physically harmed. I knew what that meant. I was on my own. That night, I set up the camera again, but this time I positioned two, one in the bedroom and one in the living room. I made sure they were hidden. I turned off all the lights, set the locks, shoved the dresser back in front of the door, and tried to sleep. I managed maybe 2 hours before something woke me. Not a noise, not a sensation, just a feeling like my body knew it wasn't safe, like it recognized something wrong in the dark. I stayed still, pretended to be asleep. My breath slow, controlled. I listened. Nothing. Then click. Soft. Mechanical. Like a camera shutter. My eyes stayed shut, but every hair on my body stood on end. I could feel it. Someone was there. I knew they were. Then another click. I couldn't hold still any longer. I lunged out of bed, knife in hand, heart thundering. But the room was empty. No one in the hall. No one in the kitchen. The front door was still blocked by the dresser. The windows were locked. Nothing had changed, but I was not alone in that room. I know that. I tore through the place, checking closets, under the bed, even the crawl space in the ceiling. Nothing. Not even a trace. Then I remembered the cameras. I rushed to my laptop and downloaded the footage. Started scanning through the timeline. The bedroom footage was quiet, just me tossing, turning. The occasional shift under the blanket. But then, at 3:04 a.m., the feed went static. Just for 17 seconds. When it came back, I was asleep again. But my bedroom door, despite the dresser in front of it, was open just an inch. And there was movement. A figure. Blurry. Barely more than a silhouette. It stood at the foot of the bed, unmoving. The video glitched, jumped ahead, and the figure was now on the left side of the bed, standing right next to my head. Another glitch. A click. The figure disappeared. It was like the camera couldn't hold the image for more than a few seconds. Like whatever it was, didn't want to be seen. I felt sick. Literally nauseous. I pulled the living room footage next. At 3:05 a.m., a shadow passed across the room. The lighting from the hallway gave just enough backlight to show movement, jerky, insect-like motion. Whoever was moved wrong, not smoothly. Their limbs bent strangely, like elbows where there shouldn't be any. They didn't enter through the door. They seemed to emerge from the corner of the room, like they stepped out of an invisible space that was just waiting to open. At 3:07, the figure looked directly at the camera, and then it smiled. A massive, exaggerated grin. Not a normal one. Not human. Too wide. Too long. And it didn't fade. It just held the smile for a full 30 seconds, then walked backward into the wall. Not out the door. Not behind the couch. Through the wall. That night, I left. I packed a bag, went to my sister's house 2 towns over. I told her it was because of the breakup, because I needed a break from the city. She let me stay in her guest room. She has kids. I didn't want them hearing the real reason. But after 2 nights, the text messages started again. Your eyes stay open longer when you're afraid. You looked right at me last night. I like that. And worst of all, don't worry. I'm already inside. I ripped the SIM card out of my phone and threw it in the garbage. But it didn't stop. The next morning, there was a new envelope waiting for me on my sister's porch. Another photo. It was taken in the guest room. I was lying on my side, mouth slightly open, clearly asleep. But this time, there was a second person in the frame. Behind me, leaning down, mouth right next to my ear, eyes enormous, milky white, staring directly into the lens. The writing on the back said, "You should never have left the door cracked open." After discovering the photograph taken in my sister's guest room, me asleep with that pale, veiny hand resting on my shoulder, I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I didn't want to endanger her or her family. I needed to find a place where I could be alone, where I could try to understand what was happening without putting others at risk. I checked into a small motel on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place that didn't ask questions, where anonymity was part of the appeal. The room was sparse: a bed, a dresser, a small table with a chair, and a bathroom that had seen better days. But it was quiet, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a semblance of control. I set up my phone to record audio throughout the night, hoping to catch any unusual sounds. I also placed a chair against the door, a makeshift alarm system. That night, I managed to sleep for a few hours, the first restful sleep I'd had in a while. But the peace was short-lived. The next morning, I played back the audio recording. For the first few hours, there was nothing but the ambient hum of the room. Then, around 3:15 a.m., a faint scratching sound began. It was subtle at first, like nails lightly grazing wood. Then, it grew louder, more insistent. It sounded like it was coming from inside the room. Then a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but it was a voice, raspy, barely audible. It sent a chill down my spine. I checked the room thoroughly, but there was nothing out of place. The door was still blocked by the chair, the windows locked. I was alone. That day, I bought a motion-activated camera and set it up in the corner of the room, aimed at the bed. I needed visual confirmation of what was happening. The following night, I repeated the setup: audio recording, camera, chair against the door. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, waiting for sleep to take me. The next morning, I reviewed the footage. At 3:14 a.m., the camera activated. The bed was visible, with me lying motionless. Then, a shadow appeared in the corner of the room. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it moved slowly, deliberately toward the bed. As it approached, the camera began to glitch. The image distorted, lines appearing across the screen. Then, the camera shut off. The audio recording captured the same scratching sound, followed by the whisper. This time, I could make out a word: closer. I felt a wave of nausea. Whatever this was, it was getting bolder. I decided to confront it. That night, I stayed awake, sitting on the bed with the lights on. I held the knife in my hand, heart pounding. At 3 a.m., the room grew colder. The air felt heavy, oppressive. Then, the lights flickered and went out. I was plunged into darkness. I fumbled for my phone, turning on a flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing the empty room. Then I saw it. In the mirror above the dresser, a figure stood behind me. Tall, gaunt, with pale skin and hollow eyes. Its mouth was open in a silent scream. I turned around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at the mirror, it was gone. I left the motel that night. I don't know where to go from here. I can't stay in one place for too long. It finds me, no matter where I am. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done with me. I didn't tell anyone where I was going next. After what happened at the motel, the mirror, the static, the voice, I packed a bag and drove through the night until the roads were unfamiliar. I wasn't following any map. I just drove, fueled by panic and a desperate need to stay ahead of whatever this thing was. I ended up in a small town called Henlow's Ridge, nestled between pines and forgotten farmland, where most of the houses looked abandoned, even if they weren't. The only place with a vacancy was a guest house run by a widowed woman named Evelyn. She was in her 60s, polite but distant, the kind of person who had stopped expecting company long ago. I didn't give my real name, just paid in cash and told her I'd be gone in a few days. The guest room she offered was on the second floor, quiet, with a view of a collapsed barn and a large, gnarled tree out back. The wallpaper was peeling in vertical strips, and the floorboards groaned when I walked, like the house had lungs beneath the floor, slowly exhaling. There was no TV, just an old radio bolted to the nightstand and a warped closet door that didn't quite close. I set up the same precautions as before. Phone recording audio, motion camera watching the bed, knife within reach. That night, I didn't sleep, not even a little. Instead, I listened. Around 2:40 a.m., the house began to make noises, more than just settling. Something was shifting in the walls. I held my breath and moved closer to the closet. The door trembled just slightly, like it was being pushed from the inside. But when I yanked it open, there was nothing. Just moth-bitten clothes hanging in still air. Then I noticed the floorboard beneath my feet. One plank near the closet looked newer, different grain than the others. I pried it up with the tip of the knife. There was something underneath. A flat, square object wrapped in old newspaper. It was a photo album. The pages inside were thick and discolored, sticky with mildew, and smelled like earth and copper. I flipped through it under the weak yellow light from the lamp. Every photo was of someone asleep. Different people, all in beds from different angles. Sometimes the faces were clear. Sometimes they were blurred or smudged. But the composition was always the same, like someone had stood quietly in the room while they slept and just watched. Then I reached the final page. It was me. Same bed, same blanket, my mouth slightly open. But in this photo, my eyes weren't fully shut. There was the faintest sliver of white showing beneath the lids, like I had started to wake up. I dropped the album. At that exact moment, the radio crackled to life. Not music, not static, breathing, close breathing, like someone was pressed right up against the mic on the other end. Then it whispered, "You left the closet open." I turned. The door to the closet, which I had just closed, was wide again. Something had changed in the room's air pressure, denser, heavier, like I was being watched by something inches from my skin. I grabbed the camera and checked the footage from the past hour. Frame by frame. Nothing moved. Then there, one frame, less than a second, a face in the grain of the wall, not pressed against it in it, its mouth open as if caught mid-scream, its eyes too far apart, too round. While I looked back up from the screen, the wallpaper directly behind me was bulging. I don't remember deciding to run. I just did. I fled the guest house that night, left most of my belongings behind. The next morning, I called Evelyn, told her I'd left something important. She didn't remember renting the room. Said she hadn't had a guest in months. When I drove back, the house looked different. Abandoned. Windows broken. Weeds climbing up the porch posts. Inside, the guest room was empty. The wallpaper was burned. Black streaks up the wall like someone had dragged their fingers through fire. The closet was gone. Just drywall, freshly painted. No seams. No door. I don't think the room was ever part of the house to begin with. I've started to understand something. This isn't about the photos. The photos are the byproduct, the aftermath. Something is watching. Something that shouldn't be able to watch. And wherever I go, it's learning. Mimicking. Getting better. It doesn't need a camera anymore. It's taken me a while to write this. Every time I try, I get this sense that someone's standing behind me. I used to think that was just a trick of the mind. Now I know better. After I left the guest house in Henlow's Ridge, I didn't sleep for 2 days. I drove aimlessly switching motels, staying off the grid, sometimes sleeping in my car. It didn't help. I'd wake up in the driver's seat to find my phone open, camera app running. Once I found a photo gallery had dozens of new images, grainy black shots, all taken at ground level like something crawling on the floor had been snapping them. Eventually, I made contact with someone who might understand. Her name was Valerie. I found her through an online thread about anomalous photographs, specifically photos showing events that hadn't yet happened. She'd posted under a deleted username, but I dug into the metadata of a linked image and traced the email. She answered on the third message. We met in a park in Kansas. She refused to give her full name, refused to meet indoors. She wore gloves, sunglasses, and kept glancing over her shoulder. She showed me a binder filled with photos. All of them looked like typical family snapshots. Kids playing in the yard, couples at barbecues, grandparents holding babies. But in every image, every single one, there was a background element that didn't belong. Sometimes it was a figure in a mirror, standing in the wrong pose. Sometimes it was a face in a window that was too flat, too symmetrical, like it was drawn instead of real. Sometimes it was a person with no features at all, just a blurred head, as if the camera had refused to capture whatever was really there. She told me these weren't hers. They were found. Some mailed to her. Some emailed anonymously. Some left in her mailbox in blank envelopes. The pattern was always the same. The photos began normal, innocuous. But then new ones would appear, sometimes showing events that hadn't happened yet, until they did. She pointed to one set. A woman lying in bed, sleeping. Another photo, days later, the same woman dead in the same bed. Eyes open. Same blanket, same lighting. It wasn't a staged shot. She said she found the obituary 4 days after receiving the photo. Then she handed me something that nearly made me vomit. It was one of the photos I had lost, the one of me sleeping. But in this version, I wasn't alone. There was something in the corner, something tall, crooked, standing so still it was easy to miss. Its arms were wrong, too long. Its head was sideways, not tilted sideways, as if it had been screwed on backward and left to dangle. Its hands were stretched toward the bed, but not touching me. Valerie tapped it. That's the man in the negative. I asked what she meant. She said no one really knows what he is, but once you've seen him, really seen him, he starts showing up in your life. Not visibly, not first. It starts in the photos, then the audio, then the mirrors, then the dreams, then the walls. Then he starts whispering. Has he whispered to you yet? She asked. I told her yes. She backed away like I was infected. He's inside you now, she said. You'll take him wherever you go. He'll want to finish the picture. When I asked what that meant, she refused to say more. Later that night, back at the motel, I noticed something strange. There was a hum coming from the closet. I moved the chair out of the way and opened the door. Nothing inside, except one thing. A photo on the floor. It was new, still warm, like it had just developed. It was a picture of me, sitting in the motel chair, just now, staring at the closet. But behind me, in the reflection of the TV screen, was the man in the negative. Closer now, his hands almost touching my neck. I tore the place apart looking for cameras. There were none. I checked the mirror. Nothing. I checked the door. It was still locked. I didn't sleep. But the next morning, my phone had another new photo. This one was different. It wasn't taken from inside the room. It was taken from inside me. From my perspective. But not from my eyes. From somewhere deeper. As if something was living under my skin, behind my eyes, and watching what I did. The timestamp on the photo said 3:42 a.m. That's when I heard my own voice say from the closet, "You're not dreaming anymore." This is where everything started unraveling. Not just around me, but inside me. You don't really know the shape of fear until it starts making sense. After I found that last photo, the one where I was sleeping with my eyes open, mouth slightly parted like I was watching something just beyond the camera, I stopped pretending this was a prank or some elaborate setup. There was a noise in the photo, if that makes sense. Not a sound, but an impression of sound, like something about the moment it captured was still happening. I remember just standing in the kitchen, clutching the stack of printed photographs, each one showing me sleeping, in different positions, different nights. Some even showed me asleep on the couch, even though I didn't remember falling asleep there. Others showed me in my bedroom, but the angle of the shot kept changing. Someone was inside the house. Someone had been inside for a long time. I didn't sleep the night I found that final photo. I sat in the living room with every light on, holding a hammer in one hand and my phone in the other. But nothing came. I watched the hallway, the door, the air vent, the ceiling fan. Every shadow that moved, every sound outside, I tracked like prey. And I kept looking at that last photo. Why were my eyes open? The next morning, I did something I had put off for too long. I called my brother, Kyle. I told him finally everything. At first, he just kept saying, "No way, man," and "That's not right," but when I showed him the photos, his voice changed. He didn't think I was making it up. He didn't even try to come up with a rational explanation. Kyle doesn't scare easily, but I could hear it in his breathing. He said one thing that chilled me more than anything else. "Dude, some of those photos aren't from your house. I had assumed they all were." But Kyle pointed out little details, a window shape I didn't recognize, wallpaper I never had, an outlet in a weird place. And then it hit me. In some of the photos, the curtains were white. Mine were navy blue. In one photo, the headboard was made of cardboard. Mine was fabric. That means whoever was taking the photos wasn't just photographing me in my own house. They were taking me somewhere else. I lost time. I had vague memories of dreams that weren't dreams. Of being carried. Of numbness. Of sound muffled like cotton in my ears. Kyle told me to get out of the house. Stay at his place. But I didn't want to leave. I didn't want whoever or whatever it was to think I was running. Because I'd started to remember something else. The click. At night, around 3:15 a.m., I always heard a soft click. I thought it was the thermostat or the fridge compressor. But now I knew what it was. It was a camera shutter. I decided to do one last sweep of the house before going to Kyle's. I started in the crawl space. Nothing. Then the attic. I'd barely been up there. Just insulation and dust. But as I shifted a box, I heard something odd. A soft rustling sound. It was coming from behind the wall. The attic had a section where the boards didn't quite line up. I peeled back a rotten panel, and behind it was a dark, narrow space. Just wide enough for someone to sit hunched. And someone had been. There was a blanket, an empty food wrapper, a water bottle, and a camera. The camera had dozens of photos on the memory card. All of me. But here's the worst part. Some photos were from weeks ago. Others were from years ago, before I even lived in this house. I clicked through, feeling bile rise in my throat. One showed me at age 12, in the backyard of our old family home. Asleep in a hammock, whoever this was. They had been watching me for most of my life. They followed me, house to house, bedroom to bedroom, snapshots in the dark, always while I slept, always alone, or so I thought. There were no photos of Kyle, no photos of friends, just me, because this thing this person only ever watched me. And now I knew where they'd been staying. Inside the wall. I didn't tell the police. I didn't tell Kyle. I didn't even take the camera. I left it there because I realized something when I came back down from the attic. The photos hadn't stopped. There was a fresh one on the kitchen table, still warm from the printer. Me, standing in the attic, just moments ago, back turned, something standing behind me. Its shape was hard to define. Long limbs, something like a burlap sack over its head, or maybe no head at all. Its hand was inches from my neck. I ran. I didn't lock the door. I didn't care. I went straight to Kyle's. I didn't sleep that night or any night for the next week. He thought I was having a breakdown. But then it happened again. At his house. I woke up at 3:15 a.m. to a click, and there, on the nightstand, was a single photo. Me, sleeping, in Kyle's guest room, with something standing over me in the dark. If you're reading this, you probably found a photo too. They say you're never truly alone. That's not just a saying. Sometimes the camera is the only thing that tells the truth. And when you hear that click, you'll know it's already too late. You can burn the photos. You can move cities. You can fill your house with light and noise and company. But none of that matters. Because once it knows you, it follows. And it always waits until you're alone. Sleeping, facing the wall, not knowing that someone or something is standing just outside the frame.